Welcome back to Cinema Around the World. This week we're looking at Uruguay. This week the 5 movies I watched were Anina, A Seaward's Journey, A 12-Year Night, A Moonless Night, and Whiskey. I said that one last for a reason, that one sucks. So first I just want to start with a little bit of context of the country itself. Uruguay is a small coastal country in South America, and I don't think some people realize quite how small Uruguay is. There's only a population of about 3 million in Uruguay. Actually, I never looked that up. It might be over 3 million. We'll probably check that and put it on screen. But it's around 3 million. And there's a really big array of different locations in Uruguay. Within very close proximity, there'll be desolate country towns and then coastal beaches. So it offers a lot of versatility in terms of shooting locations, which is very clear in the movies you watch. Most of these movies, they tackle themes of isolation. That's very evident when you understand the landscape of the country itself, with such a small population, such desolate areas. This kind of leads nicely onto my next point, which is trying to find some sort of identity in Uruguayan cinema. And there's a pretty clear thematic link in these movies. Like I said, the themes of loneliness and isolation. Maybe Anina is a little bit of a anomaly in that case, but that was a kid's movie, so that's nor here nor there. This tied in with desolate landscapes, an undying focus on realism, smooth, sensual acoustic music in the background, also just deadpan humor in all these movies kind of make up what I feel like is a cinematic identity. The filmmaking is very practical and it's rarely flashy. I don't feel like it suffers too much from this though, because it still creates extremely emotionally potent films that usually are more character driven anyway. For the majority of the time, these movies, they do find ways to entertain and capture my imagination, but there are cases where I feel like they're just a bit too drab and they're just a bit too much of nothing going on. I'm looking at you, Whiskey. But this kind of comes with this deadpan style of humor, which lands for some people, doesn't land for others. Overall, I feel like there is a lot of merit in Uruguayan cinema, even if for some crushed attention spans, you might not be able to get through it. But I quite enjoyed a lot of these movies, and I'll get more into them now. Let's get this one over with. I've mentioned it a few times. Whiskey. It's an interesting case. It's cold, it's despondent, it's slow moving, and it's deadpan. These are nice ways of saying it's really fucking boring, and I did not enjoy it. It's simply too deadpan. Everything about it, everything I just said, is completely intentional. If that description kind of sounds like something you'd like, then please watch this movie. It just isn't something I like. So basically the movie follows an owner of a sock factory whose brother comes to visit after their mother passes away. He asks an employee of this sock factory to pose as his wife, and she just goes along with it. Both of these are kind of a little bit unexplained, but I think that's the point. The characters themselves could be really interesting, and they do have their moments, but they are kind of few and far between. So many scenes just filled with dull greys, washed out blues, and if you're lucky, the characters might talk to each other. But most of the time, they don't. Honestly, you look on screen and you think, are they alive? Are they alive? Are their hearts beating? I don't know. The themes, they're once again really focused on loneliness and a feeling of isolation, and the mundanity and the monotony that seems to come with this feeling. And it's not the characters themselves that are the problem, I don't think. There's actually some interesting moments. Like take Marta, for example, where I feel like is actually the heart of the movie. She starts as just this lonely sock employee, and by meeting the brother, she kind of comes out of her shell, and by the end almost outgrows the sock factory itself and outgrows this loneliness that she'd become so accustomed to, which I think is actually a really interesting story. It's just a shame that it doesn't show it enough and usually just sits on the mundanity and just shows it to you rather than really exploring it in a way that I would have found exciting or enjoyable, or even had just an ounce of life in it. For some people, just showing it, the craft that goes into it is enough, but it's just not for me. Big shocker, Seaward's Journey is about more lonely people. It's about 5 lonely men who go on a road trip from an isolated rural country town in Uruguay to the coast to see the sea for the first time. It's honestly such a simple movie. That's really it. That's the whole movie. They're in the back of a truck and they talk. But it's a showcase in simplistic filmmaking and expert dialogue. And it's somehow funny and interesting the entire time, despite the fact that the whole movie is just set in the truck. The characters have enough personality and keep the dynamic fun enough, and the bumps along the way keep the tension just about interesting enough. You could honestly say it feels more like a podcast at times, the way they're just chatting about things and you're just there to listen, because there really are no tassels. The filmmaking is purely practical, as I've said about other movies. And it just kind of works as a vessels for these characters to shoot the shit. That's really it. The final scene is something I would like to talk about just a little bit, because I think that is fantastic. And it epitomizes why this movie works so well. And it's spoiler alert, they finally get to see the sea at the end of their journey. And they have the most lukewarm reaction of all time. It's a fun movie, but there's no fireworks. So this movie's probably what I'd say is the exception in the bunch. It doesn't necessarily follow the identity which I've brought up before. It has a more surrealist tone, but it still feels very special in its own right. It's got a really stunning, unique animation style which blends 2D and 3D together. It is a big departure from the realism I'd come to expect from Uruguayan films. It is practical in the way that this surrealist tone is used to portray what it's like to be a young kid with a vivid imagination, basically. All these things are done from her perspective to make you feel like you are Anina in this strange world. The story follows Anina with the central problem, the beating heart of the film, being that she struggles with the fact her 3 names are palindromes. And that's so whimsical. It's so fun. It's such a childish problem to have, and it fits the tone of the movie really well. Her dad loves her name and is obsessed with palindromes, yet she hates it, and she feels this disconnect to her own name. It's something that he gave her and she never decided and she never liked. And that's me digging a little bit deeper into the themes, but at the end of the day, it's a kid's movie, and that has to be had with a grain of salt. It's not thematically dense, but it is a good kids movie, and it does feel like there was a lot of love put into it. A big honorable mention here for my second favorite movie of the bunch. That's A Moonless Night. Look, anthology movies, they're always risky, and I wasn't particularly impressed during the first story of the 3, but boy, was I rewarded for my patience with the last 2. All 3 stories are set on New Year's Day and explore similar themes and have similar plot devices in there. All 3 characters are lonely and are given a chance at redemption and a chance to finally connect despite their isolation. And I really don't want to give too much away on this one, as I feel the emotion is much more earnest if you just come in from square one with nothing there. It's a slow, quiet movie which remains very reserved in its storytelling. Really doesn't push these stories further than they need to go, even though you feel they might at some point. It links them together just enough so it still feels cohesive, and as we reach the end of the movie, the editing is really fantastic because it starts to weave these stories together. It just comes together in such an impactful and powerful way. It's 3 lonely stars in the sky finally getting their chance to shine bright. It's Kindred Spirits. And finally, my pick of the bunch, a really horrific but also fantastic watch, A 12-Year Night. It follows 3 men who are political prisoners in the Uruguayan dictatorship. Basically, they spend 12 years in solitary confinement. It is a really heartbreaking movie as it puts you in their place and you kind of feel like you're a prisoner with them as you're watching this movie. And I don't think there's better evidence of this than this scene here, which I'll put on the screen, which visually I feel like really shows this as it puts you behind the bars with him. It's a scene where he's talking to his family, and these bars are there the entire time, which separate him from his family and also separate you from them and create this distance. And I feel like the whole movie, when I say Uruguayan cinema is very practical, find ways to practically convey that you're there with them and how they must have felt in this scenario. The locations are something I also want to talk about, which are ridiculous. They get moved from one cavernous prison to another, and seemingly they get worse and worse throughout the movie, which feels nearly impossible. Just the little things in this movie I feel like are done so well too, which make it feel all the more depressing. It's like the things like the sound design and the costuming and the makeup. But most of all, it's the performances of these 3 main actors, because my god, these performances are incredible. It looks like these actors have actually been starved and have been locked up for the 12 years, because the way they portray it is just so realistic. It's overall, it really is a must watch, but please, warning, don't do it before bed like I did, because I didn't sleep for hours. So as the series goes on, I'll have a leaderboard ranking with all the different cinemas, and for Uruguay, that's a 6.8, and so that moves into first, just above Kenya. I'll see you next time.